I am Haley Bennett, 32 years old, daughter of the billionaire tech moguls who built Meridian Technologies from a garage startup to a global empire. My older brother Thomas always resented how close I was with our parents. What should have been a healing vacation turned into a nightmare when he pushed me off our yacht in the Mediterranean, leaving me for dead so he could take control of our $7.5 billion inheritance. He never expected I would survive. He certainly never expected I would be waiting for him 3 months later, with an envelope that would destroy everything he thought he had won. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on my brother, let me know where you are watching from and hit that subscribe button. You will want to stick around to see what was in the envelope I handed him when he thought he had seen a ghost. My parents were the definition of the American dream. Dad was a brilliant programmer with dyslexia who dropped out of college because the education system failed him, not because he lacked intelligence. Mom was a marketing genius who recognized the potential in his ideas when no one else would. They met at a tech convention where Mom was representing another company, and within 6 months they had started Meridian Technologies in our grandparents' old garage. Their first breakthrough came when Dad developed a revolutionary data encryption system that major banks adopted worldwide. Mom knew exactly how to pitch it, who to approach, and when to hold firm on their asking price. By the time I was born, they had already become millionaires. Thomas was 4 years older than me, born during their struggling early years. The difference between us was apparent from childhood. While Thomas expected things to be handed to him because we were wealthy, I worked alongside our parents in the lab from age 10, genuinely interested in the technology they were creating. Dad would beam with pride when I solved coding problems or suggested improvements to their latest innovations. Mom would take me to important meetings, teaching me how to read a room and understand the psychology behind business negotiations. I can still remember Thomas standing in the doorway of the home lab watching us with that look on his face. Not anger exactly, more like a cold calculation. While I was learning the business from the inside out, Thomas was spending his allowance on parties and status symbols, trying to impress his friends with our family name. That is not to say our parents did not love him. They adored Thomas and constantly tried to include him in family projects. They funded his startup ideas that inevitably failed because he lacked the work ethic to see them through. They bought him cars when he crashed them, paid for prestigious schools he got kicked out of, and always welcomed him home with open arms. I loved my brother despite his flaws. When classmates would target him for being the spoiled rich kid, I defended him. When he needed help with school projects, I stayed up all night with him to finish them. I believed that somewhere beneath his jealousy was the sweet brother I occasionally glimpsed in rare, unguarded moments. Everything changed 3 years ago when our parents' plane went down over the Rocky Mountains during a storm. They were returning from a technology conference in Seattle. No survivors. The tragedy devastated us both, though we processed it differently. I threw myself into preserving their legacy at Meridian, while Thomas threw lavish parties that he claimed were celebrations of their lives, but looked more like excuses to drink expensive champagne. The inheritance structure shocked everyone, especially Thomas. Our parents left the company, and their entire $7.5 billion fortune in both our names, with a stipulation that all major business decisions required mutual agreement from both of us. Their lawyer explained that they believed in both our strengths and wanted us to balance each other out. In retrospect, it was their final attempt to force Thomas to grow up and for us to work together as a family. For the first year, the arrangement was strained but functional. I ran daily operations while Thomas enjoyed being the face of the company at public events. The board respected me but humored him. Then Thomas started pushing for changes that would have horrified our parents, cutting the research division that worked on medical technologies in favor of more immediately profitable ventures, laying off long-term employees to boost short-term profits, and trying to sell our revolutionary healthcare patents to the highest bidder. I blocked every destructive move, showing him the data proving these were bad long-term strategies. Each time I countered him with facts, his resentment grew. Board meetings became battlegrounds where we barely maintained professionalism. Private family dinners ended in slammed doors and threats. The last straw came when I discovered he had been meeting secretly with board members, trying to convince them I was emotionally unstable after our parents' death. Then suddenly last spring, Thomas changed his approach. He invited me to lunch at our favorite childhood restaurant and proposed a 3-week yacht trip through the Mediterranean. Just the two of us with a small crew like the family vacations we took as teenagers. A chance to heal our relationship away from business pressures. I was skeptical, but hopeful. Perhaps he had finally accepted our shared responsibility. Perhaps he truly wanted to rebuild our bond as siblings. I should have trusted my initial instincts instead of my wishful thinking. The Mediterranean waters might be beautiful, but they almost became my grave. The first days aboard the Blue Horizon were everything Thomas had promised. We anchored in secluded coves along the Italian coastline where we snorkeled in crystal-clear waters. We docked in charming ports in Greece where we ate fresh seafood at family-owned tavernas. For the first time since our parents died, Thomas seemed present listening when I spoke about them, even sharing fond memories I had forgotten. The yacht itself was magnificent, 120 feet of luxury, with 6 staterooms, a hot tub on the upper deck, and a staff of 8 to attend our every need. The chef prepared our favorite childhood meals, and the captain shared fascinating stories about Mediterranean history as we sailed between destinations. I began to lower my guard. Perhaps this trip was exactly what we needed. Perhaps Thomas had finally matured and accepted that we could be stronger together than at odds. When he asked about my latest ideas for the medical research division, I enthusiastically shared my vision for expanding Meridian's non-profit work in developing countries. He nodded with what appeared to be genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about implementation and funding. By the end of the first week, I was sleeping soundly for the first time in months. The constant knot of tension in my shoulders had loosened. I even found myself planning future trips we could take together, believing our relationship might be salvageable after all. It was subtle at first, things I might have imagined. The steward avoiding eye contact when serving my morning coffee. The normally chatty deckhand falling silent when I approached. Once I entered the galley to find 2 crew members whispering only to abruptly separate when they saw me. When I asked if everything was okay, their smiles seemed forced as they assured me all was well. I dismissed these observations as paranoia left over from months of corporate battles with Thomas. After all, the crew worked for him, so perhaps they were just more comfortable in his presence. I was determined not to let suspicion ruin our reconciliation. On the 10th day, while Thomas was jet skiing, I returned to the yacht earlier than expected due to a mild sunburn. Passing his cabin, I noticed the door slightly ajar. I should have respected his privacy, but something pulled me inside. His laptop was open on the desk. I had never invaded my brother's privacy before, but some instinct urged me forward. The spreadsheet displayed on the screen made my blood run cold. It detailed a complete restructuring of Meridian Technologies with my name notably absent from the organizational chart. A document titled Succession Plan outlined how the company would announce my tragic accident and transition smoothly to Thomas' sole leadership. Another folder contained what appeared to be offshore account numbers and transfer protocols. My hands shaking, I took photos of the screen with my phone before carefully backing out of the room. My mind raced with possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Perhaps this was just contingency planning. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding. Deep down, I knew better. That evening, I pretended nothing had changed, laughing at Thomas' jokes over dinner, while my stomach churned with anxiety. After I excused myself to my stateroom, I stood on my private balcony trying to decide what to do. The sound of voices drifted up from the deck below. Thomas and a woman. I recognized her voice as Natalie, his girlfriend who was supposed to join us the following week. Somehow, she had arrived early without my knowledge. Their words carried clearly on the night air confirmed my worst fears. "You are sure the captain is on board with the plan?" Natalie asked. Thomas chuckled. For what I'm paying him, he would throw her overboard himself if I asked. But I want to handle that personally. The crew knows to be scarce tomorrow morning. And afterward, Natalie pressed. We wait an appropriate amount of time searching call in the authorities with our tragic story, and by the time we return to New York, I'll have complete control. The board already thinks she's been making emotional decisions. They will welcome steady leadership. Will they investigate? She sounded nervous. A tragic accident in international waters. With no body, Thomas laughed coldly. By the time anyone asks serious questions, the company will be restructured, assets moved, and we will be living exactly as we deserve. I spent that night cycling through disbelief, heartbreak, and terror. How had I not seen this coming? How could my own brother, my blood plan, my murder? So methodically, I considered confronting him immediately, but realized that might only accelerate his timeline. I thought about approaching the crew, but which ones could I trust if they were all being paid for their complicity? I decided to act normal while finding a way to communicate with the outside world. Thomas had suggested we both leave our phones in airplane mode to truly disconnect during our vacation with satellite phones available for emergencies. Now I understood why. The next morning at breakfast, Thomas was unusually cheerful, refilling my coffee cup himself. There was something performative in his attention, something that sent chills down my spine despite the warm Mediterranean Sunday. "We have perfect weather today," he said, looking out at the calm sea. "I thought we could have morning coffee on the forward deck, just the two of us." For some reason, the staff was nowhere to be seen. "Watch the sunrise like we used to with Mom and Dad on the lake." I agreed with what I hoped was a convincing smile, my mind frantically searching for a way out of what was clearly a trap. The forward deck was eerily empty, as Thomas led me to two chairs positioned near the railing. We sat facing the sunrise orange and pink hues, spreading across the sky, reflecting on the calm Mediterranean waters. In another context, it would have been breathtakingly beautiful. Today it felt like watching my own funeral pyre being prepared. I watched Thomas carefully from the corner of my eye as he set down our coffee cups. His movements were precise, rehearsed. The yacht engines had gone silent, and I realized we had stopped in open water far from shipping lanes or other vessels. The perfect location for an accident. "So Thomas," I said, deciding direct confrontation was my only option, "I saw some interesting documents in your cabin yesterday. Something about succession planning." The transformation was immediate. The mask of brotherly affection dropped, replaced by cold calculation. His smile remained but didn't reach his eyes. "Always the little snoop, weren't you, Haley?" he said, his tone conversational, but with an underlying hardness I'd never heard before. "Always Mommy and Daddy's perfect little genius, poking your nose where it doesn't belong." "They were our parents, Thomas, not just mine. And they loved you too," I said, inching my chair subtly away from the railing. "They just wanted you to earn things rather than have them handed to you." He laughed, a bitter sound that echoed across the empty deck. "Earn things. Like you earned their approval by being born with the right kind of brain. Like you earned their attention by being the perfect little prodigy." He stood up, looming over me. "I was born first. I should have been first in everything else too." "Is that what this is about?" I asked, also standing to avoid the vulnerable seated position. "You would kill your own sister because you felt second best." His face contorted with rage. "I deserved everything," he shouted, abandoning all pretense. "I put up with their disappointment, their constant comparisons for 36 years. Then, when they finally die, they still don't trust me enough to run my own birthright." "Our birthright," I corrected, which triggered something dangerous in his eyes. "No," Thomas hissed, advancing toward me. "Mine. It was always supposed to be mine. You were the mistake, the afterthought, and now you're the obstacle." I backed away, but the railing was closer than I'd realized. "Thomas, this is insane. Think about what you're doing." "Oh, I've thought about it," he said with frightening calm. "For months now, the tragic accident, the grieving brother. The company finally under the right leadership." He smiled almost dreamily. "And the best part, no one will ever question it." Poor fragile Haley never quite recovered from losing Mom and Dad, standing too close to the edge after having too much to drink. I realized with horror that the coffee he had served likely contained something to make his story more convincing. I had only taken a small sip, but even that might have been too much. "The people at Meridian know me," I countered. "They know I wouldn't be reckless." "People believe what they're told by those in charge," he shrugged. "And after you're gone, that will be me." I tried one last appeal to whatever fraternal bond might remain. Thomas, we're family, the only family each of us has left. Mom and Dad would be heartbroken to see this. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, doubt, perhaps even shame. but it hardened quickly into resolve. "They chose you, until the very end," he snarled. "Even in death they couldn't fully trust me. Well, now they don't get a vote." He lunged forward suddenly, hands outstretched. I ducked and tried to run, but the deck offered little room to maneuver. His hand caught my arm, yanking me backward with surprising strength. We struggled briefly, his rage giving him an advantage over my terror. In a desperate move, I slammed my head forward, connecting with his nose. He howled in pain, blood streaming down his face, but his grip only tightened as he pushed me toward the railing. Time seemed to slow as I felt my lower back hit the metal rail. Thomas' face, contorted with hatred and smeared with blood, filled my vision as he gave one final powerful shove. "Goodbye, sis," he sneered as I toppled backward. "Mom and Dad's favorite won't be a problem anymore." The fall seemed to last forever, my arms windmilling uselessly in the air. Then came the shocking cold of the water, the impact knocking the breath from my lungs. I plunged deep beneath the surface, disoriented and desperate for air. When I finally broke through, gasping and sputtering, I saw Thomas looking down from the deck, watching to ensure his plan succeeded. He made a show of panic, throwing a life preserver into the water deliberately far from where I treaded water. I could hear him shouting for help, but no crew appeared. Then he disappeared from the railing, and moments later the yacht engines roared to life. The massive vessel began moving away, leaving me alone in the vast Mediterranean. The initial shock gave way to the grim reality of my situation. I was at least a mile from any visible land, injured from the impact with the water, and already feeling the fatigue of fighting the gentle but persistent waves. Hypothermia would set in eventually despite the relatively warm water. If exhaustion didn't claim me first, dehydration certainly would within days. But something fierce and primal awoke within me, a refusal to give Thomas what he wanted. I would not die here. I would not become another tragic headline, another victim. With our parents gone, I was the only one left who could protect their legacy from Thomas' corruption. I forced myself to float conservatively, preserving energy while scanning the horizon. The sun was now fully risen, making it difficult to spot distant lights that might indicate a vessel or shore. Hours passed as I drifted, alternating between different swimming strokes, when I had the energy floating on my back, when I didn't. My lips grew cracked from the salt water. My skin, burning under the relentless Sunday hallucinations, began to flicker at the edges of my vision, my mother's hand reaching for me, my father's voice calling my name. I talked to them both, apologizing for failing to protect what they had built, promising to fight until my last breath. Just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, marking what I feared would be my last day alive, I spotted something in the distance. At first I thought it was another mirage, a small dark shape breaking the line where sea met sky. But unlike my other visions, this one didn't disappear when I blinked my salt-stung eyes. A boat. Small, weathered, likely a local fishing vessel. With renewed determination, I began swimming toward it, ignoring the screaming pain in my muscles. I had no voice left to shout, no strength to wave dramatically, so I focused every remaining ounce of energy on reducing the distance between us. Whether by miracle or sheer stubbornness, I closed enough distance for someone aboard to notice the unusual sight of a woman swimming miles from shore. The boat changed course, heading in my direction. As it drew closer, I could make out an elderly man, standing at the bow, shading his eyes to peer in my direction. With the last reserves of my strength depleted, I managed to raise one arm in a weak wave before the darkness at the edges of my vision closed in entirely. I awoke to the smell of fish and the gentle rocking of a boat much smaller than the luxury yacht I'd fallen from. A weathered face loomed over me, deep lines etched by sun and sea. White beard stained yellow at the edges, kind eyes filled with concern. He spoke rapidly in Greek, none of which I understood in my disoriented state. I later learned this man was Andreas Kostas, a 72-year-old fisherman who had been working these waters for over 50 years. He had spotted what he first thought was debris, but then realized was a person when he saw my arm move. According to his granddaughter, who would become my translator, he said he had never seen anyone so determined to live. Andreas had pulled my nearly unconscious body from the water onto his small fishing boat and covered me with his jacket. Unable to communicate with me, and seeing my injured state, he had immediately set course for his village on a small island, instead of the more populated tourist destinations further away. The village of Kithara consisted of perhaps 30 whitewashed houses, clustered around a small harbor, the kind of place untouched by the outside world. Andreas brought me to his modest home where his granddaughter Maria, a university student visiting for the summer, rushed to help. She spoke excellent English, translating her grandfather's rapid Greek as she helped me into dry clothes and examined my injuries. "You are very lucky," she said as she applied homemade salve to the abrasions on my back and arms. "The currents could have carried you out to sea. Most people would have drowned within hours." My voice was raspy from salt water and exhaustion. "I need to call someone I managed, in America." Mariah's expression grew concerned. "First, you must rest. You have a mild concussion, dehydration, and possibly the beginning of pneumonia. The island's doctor will come soon." The doctor, a middle-aged woman who visited from the mainland once a month, confirmed Mariah's assessment and added that I had 3 cracked ribs likely from the impact with the water. She prescribed rest antibiotics from her limited supplies and insisted I remain in the village for at least 2 weeks. During those first days of recovery, drifting in and out of feverish sleep on Andreas' spare bed, I had one coherent thought: no one could know I was alive. Not yet. Thomas would have reported my drowning by now, presented himself as the grieving brother, and begun implementing his plans for Meridian. If he learned I had survived, he would find a way to finish what he started. When I was strong enough to sit up and think clearly, I asked Maria if I could use her laptop to check the news. She brought it to the bedside, connected to the village's sluggish internet service. What I saw confirmed my worst fears. Headlines from financial and technology publications announced the tragic death of Haley Bennett, co-heir to the Meridian Technologies fortune, in a boating accident off the Greek coast. Thomas Bennett. My grieving brother had reportedly done everything possible to save me after I accidentally fell overboard during rough weather, including delaying his departure from the search area until authorities insisted no survivor could remain. A memorial service had been held at our parents' church in New York, attended by hundreds of business associates and friends. Photos showed Thomas somber in a black suit, his girlfriend Natalie supportively at his side, her face appropriately downcast, though I could detect the satisfaction in her eyes even through the grainy news images. Most disturbing were the business announcements that followed. Thomas had been unanimously approved as sole CEO by the board in an emergency session. He had already announced a complete restructuring of the company, including the termination of our parents' oldest friend, an ally, Robert Walsh, who had served as chief operating officer for 20 years. The medical research division, my parents' pride and joy, was being prepared for sale to a pharmaceutical giant known for its predatory pricing. Longtime employees were being let go, in waves replaced by new hires loyal to Thomas. Everything my parents had built, everything they valued, was being systematically dismantled. Most painful were the quotes attributed to Thomas in these articles. Haley would have wanted the company to move forward boldly, and while my sister excelled in research, she lacked the broader vision needed for today's competitive marketplace. He was not only killing me physically, but erasing who I had been, rewriting my values to align with his greed. Further research revealed Thomas and Natalie were living lavishly in our family mansion, hosting parties attended by celebrities and business moguls. Social media posts tagged them at exclusive restaurants and exotic destinations, all while the ink was barely dry on my death certificate. My brother's performance of grief had apparently been brief and shallow. The final blow came when I discovered Thomas had established a memorial foundation in my name, one that had nothing to do with the causes I cared about. Instead, it appeared to be a tax shelter that would funnel money back into his pet projects while creating the illusion of philanthropy. For 3 days after these discoveries, I barely spoke, processing the magnitude of my brother's betrayal and the losses that extended far beyond an attempt on my life. This wasn't just about money or control. Thomas was systematically erasing our parents' legacy and everything I had fought to preserve. Maria and Andreas respected my silence, bringing me simple meals of fresh fish and homemade bread, sitting beside me, without demanding explanations. In their quiet, dignified presence, I found the space to grieve, and then gradually to plan. I could not simply announce I was alive and return to New York. Thomas had resources, connections, and a demonstrated willingness to kill me. Any public reappearance would put me in immediate danger before I could gather enough evidence to prove what had happened. Additionally, with his control of the company and our shared assets, he could legally block my access to the funds I would need for protection and legal representation. I needed someone I could trust. Absolutely someone. Thomas would never suspect someone with the skills to help me build a case that would be irrefutable. After careful consideration, I reached out to the one person who fit that description, Miranda Chen, my roommate from MIT, who had become a corporate attorney specializing in whistleblower cases. Using Mariah's phone rather than any device that could be traced to me, I sent Miranda a message through an encrypted platform we had occasionally used to discuss sensitive company matters. The message was simple. Not dead. Need help. Trust no one. Can you come to coordinates without telling anyone? The response came within hours. Oh my God. Yes. Give me 3 days. Burn this after reading. True to her word, Miranda arrived at the small village 3 days later, having told her firm she needed personal time for a family emergency. Her shock at seeing me alive quickly transformed into fierce determination as I recounted the entire story, showing her the photos I'd taken of Thomas' documents on the yacht. For my safety, we decided I would remain officially dead while we gathered evidence. Miranda would return to New York, as my eyes and ears collecting proof of Thomas' crimes while I recovered my strength. Once we had an airtight case, we would approach trusted law enforcement officials rather than going public, minimizing the window during which Thomas could retaliate. To enable my eventual return to the United States, undetected Miranda created a new identity for me with the help of contacts from her whistleblower protection work. For the next month, while physically recovering in the village, I became Jennifer Walsh, a Canadian tourist, extending her Mediterranean vacation after falling in love with the unspoiled beauty of the small Greek islands. As my strength returned, Maria taught me basic Greek phrases, while her grandmother showed me how to help with fishing nets and cooking local dishes. Their kindness and lack of questions about my complicated situation created a sanctuary where I could heal, not just physically, but emotionally from my brother's ultimate betrayal. Meanwhile, Miranda worked tirelessly in New York, sending encrypted updates about the evidence she was gathering. She discovered Thomas had bribed 2 crew members from the yacht to corroborate his story about rough seas and my accidental fall. However, the captain, increasingly uncomfortable with his role in what he now suspected was not an accident, had begun drinking heavily and making concerning comments at local bars. Miranda approached him carefully, presenting herself as a maritime insurance investigator. After several meetings and increasing amounts of expensive scotch, the captain confessed that the seas had been perfectly calm that day, that Thomas had instructed the crew to remain below deck, and that he had been paid an extraordinary sum to alter the ship's logs and support Thomas' version of events. Most damning of all, Miranda uncovered offshore accounts where Thomas had been diverting company funds for months before our yacht trip. The amounts transferred accelerated dramatically after my reported death, with millions flowing to shell companies he controlled. She also obtained email exchanges between Thomas and several board members dating back nearly a year, discussing how to remove me from the company leadership through legal means, before he apparently decided on a more permanent solution. With each new piece of evidence Miranda secured, my determination grew. This was no longer just about justice for myself or preserving my parents' legacy. The employees whose livelihoods were being destroyed, the patients who would suffer without access to the affordable medical technologies my parents had developed, the charitable causes that would lose funding, all of these now depended on stopping Thomas. 3 months after the day my brother tried to kill me, Miranda confirmed that we had enough evidence for authorities to act. Thomas and Natalie were scheduled to return from a 2-week vacation in the Maldives the following evening. They would be arriving at the family mansion expecting their usual staff welcome. Instead, I would be waiting, with a very different reception. The pieces were in place. It was time to rise from the dead and reclaim what was mine. I will never forget Miranda's face when she first saw me alive in Andrea's small kitchen, sitting at the weathered wooden table with a cup of herbal tea. She had followed my cryptic instructions, perfectly telling no one of her journey, taking a series of connecting flights to obscure her destination, and finally hiring a local fisherman to bring her to the remote village. When Andreas opened the door to her knock, Miranda stepped inside cautiously. The moment our eyes met, she froze, her carry-on bag slipping from her fingers to thud on the stone floor. She pressed one hand to her mouth, tears immediately forming. "Haley," she whispered, as though afraid, speaking my name too loudly might make me disappear. "Is it really you?" I stood still, moving carefully with my healing ribs, and nodded. "It's me, Miranda. I'm alive." She crossed the room in 3 quick strides and embraced me gently, mindful of my obvious physical fragility despite her emotional response. I felt her shoulders shake with silent sobs. "I watched your memorial service," she said when she finally pulled back to look at me. "Thomas' speech about losing his beloved sister was the most convincing performance I've ever seen. I actually felt sorry for him." "Hez always been good at playing whatever role served him best," I replied, gesturing for her to sit. "But now I need your help to make sure his final performance is in a courtroom." That night, as Andreas and Maria gave us privacy, Miranda and I talked until dawn. I shared every detail of the events on the yacht, the documents I'd discovered, and my suspicions about how long Thomas had been planning my demise. Miranda, in turn, filled me in on the rapid changes at Meridian and the widespread acceptance of the narrative Thomas had created about my accident. What disturbed me most was learning how quickly people had accepted his version of me, a brilliant but naive researcher who never really understood the business side of the company, whose absence, while tragic, might ultimately benefit Meridian's bottom line. Colleagues I'd worked with for years now quoted Thomas' assessment of my contributions as though they had always held those views. "We need to be extremely careful," Miranda warned. "Thomas has consolidated power remarkably efficiently. He has the board, the press, and most of the employees believing his narrative. More concerning, he has hired an entire new security team for both the company and his personal protection." "You think he's worried someone will discover what he did?" I asked. Miranda shook her head. "I think he's always planned to operate like a dictator once he had control. The security is just part of his new lifestyle as sole heir to the Bennett fortune, but it complicates our approach. If you simply showed up alive, he could have you removed as a mentally unstable imposter before you could speak to anyone with authority." "We need evidence that cannot be disputed," I agreed. "And we need to control exactly how and when I reappear." Over the next weeks, as I regained my physical strength through daily swims in the Mediterranean and hikes around the island, Miranda and I developed our strategy. She would return to New York, using her position as a respected corporate attorney to gather evidence without raising suspicions. I would remain in Kathira, officially dead to the world, while preparing for my carefully orchestrated resurrection. The plan required absolute secrecy. Even Andreas and Maria knew only that I had been involved in some kind of family dispute and needed to remain hidden. They never asked for details, offering their continued protection with the simple dignity that characterized everything they did. I began contributing to the household by helping with cooking, cleaning, and even learning to mend fishing net skills I'd never imagined acquiring as the heiress to a tech fortune. 10 days after her arrival, Miranda reluctantly returned to New York, carrying a burner phone that would be our only connection. Our communications would be minimal and heavily encrypted, reducing the risk of Thomas discovering my survival. While Miranda worked in New York, I focused on my transformation. The woman who would return to confront Thomas could not be the same person he had pushed overboard. That Haley had been blindsided by her brother's betrayal, emotionally vulnerable despite her business acumen. The new Haley needed to be strategically ruthless, emotionally armored, and prepared for any counterattack Thomas might launch. I dyed my naturally blonde hair, dark brown, and cut it short in Maria's bathroom with fishing scissors. I spent hours in the sun developing a deep tan that further altered my appearance. I practiced speaking in a slightly lower register and adopting subtle changes in my posture and gait. Small changes individually, but collectively, they created a version of me Thomas would not immediately recognize at a distance or in poor lighting, buying crucial seconds of surprise when we finally faced each other. Miranda proved invaluable in New York. Her first major breakthrough came when she located the yacht captain Anthony Diaz, who had been paid to corroborate Thomas' story. Now drinking heavily in waterfront bars and making troubling comments about accidents that weren't accidents, he was clearly wrestling with his conscience. Miranda approached him carefully, presenting herself initially as an insurance investigator, following up on standard procedures. Over several meetings, she gained his trust, and eventually, his confession. Captain Diaz admitted the seas had been calm the day I disappeared, that Thomas had instructed the crew to remain below deck during our morning coffee, and that he had been paid $500,000 to alter the ship's logs and support Thomas' version of events. Most importantly, Captain Diaz was willing to testify about what he had witnessed. Thomas returning to the bridge alone, calmly ordering him to turn the yacht around, claiming I had fallen overboard. Thomas had made a show of throwing a life preserver but deliberately aimed away from where I was struggling in the water. He had delayed calling for help until I was no longer visible, ensuring I would not be found even if search vessels responded quickly. With the captain's testimony secured, Miranda focused on the financial evidence. Using her legal credentials and contacts at firms that worked with Meridian, she uncovered a complex web of offshore accounts where Thomas had been diverting company funds. The transfers had begun months before our yacht trip, but accelerated dramatically after my reported death. She also obtained email exchanges between Thomas and several board members dating back nearly a year, discussing how to remove me from leadership through legal means. These communications revealed that when those efforts failed, due to the inheritance structure our parents had created, some board members had suggested more aggressive approaches to neutralizing my influence. While none explicitly suggested murder, the subtext was clear to anyone reading between the lines. Perhaps most disturbing was Miranda's discovery about the future of Meridian under Thomas' leadership. He was secretly negotiating to sell our medical technology division, the part of the company dedicated to developing affordable treatments for previously untreatable conditions, to a pharmaceutical conglomerate known for acquiring revolutionary medications and raising prices beyond reach of average patients. This was the division our parents had protected even during financial downturns, the embodiment of their belief that profit and purpose could coexist. 6 weeks into our covert operation, Miranda sent an encrypted message that changed everything. Thomas and Natalie booking 2-week vacation to Maldives. Mansion will be minimally staffed. Perfect window for your return. Confirmation Thomas authorized company jet for personal trip attached. This was the opportunity we had been waiting for. While Thomas and Natalie enjoyed a luxury resort halfway around the world, we would prepare the stage for their return. Miranda immediately began coordinating with the law enforcement contacts. She trusted a senior FBI agent who specialized in corporate crime and a district attorney known for his incorruptibility. The timing had to be perfect. If Thomas learned of my survival before we had him legally cornered, he would use his resources to disappear or create a new narrative painting me as the villain. If we moved too slowly after his return, he might detect something amiss in the behavior of staff or associates who learned I was alive. 48 hours before Thomas' scheduled return, I flew from Athens to New York using my Jennifer Walsh Canadian passport, wearing a dark wig, glasses, and clothing that obscured my still thin frame. Miranda met me at a private airfield rather than the main airport, further reducing the chance of recognition. She had secured a small apartment in Brooklyn under her cousin's name where I could make final preparations. From this safe house, we coordinated with our law enforcement allies, providing them with the complete dossier of evidence while planning the precise sequence of events that would unfold at the family mansion. The household staff had always been loyal to our family as a whole rather than Thomas specifically. Mrs. Rodriguez, our housekeeper of 20 years, had practically helped raise us after our mother became busy with the expanding company. When Miranda approached her privately, explaining that I was alive and needed her help, Mrs. Rodriguez broke down in tears of joy and immediately pledged her assistance. Through Mrs. Rodriguez, we gained the support of key staff members who had been disturbed by Thomas' erratic behavior and cruel treatment since taking control. They agreed to maintain absolute normalcy until the moment of confrontation, giving no indication to Thomas that anything had changed. The final piece fell into place when Robert Walsh, our parents' oldest friend and recently fired COO, agreed to bring keyboard members to the mansion on the pretense of an urgent meeting with Thomas immediately upon his return. Robert had been devastated by my apparent death and outraged by the dismantling of the company values he had helped establish. His participation ensured we would have witnesses beyond law enforcement when Thomas' facade finally crumbled. The evening before Thomas' scheduled return, I stood in front of the mirror in the Brooklyn safe house, hardly recognizing myself. My once long blonde hair was now a short brown bob. My formerly fair skin had Mediterranean darkness. 3 months of simple island food and physical labor had transformed my body from corporate polish to lean resilience. But the greatest change was in my eyes. The naive trust was gone, replaced by a clear-eyed determination that would have made my parents proud. Thomas had tried to destroy me to take what he felt entitled to. Instead, he had forged a stronger version of me, one capable of protecting our parents' legacy from his corruption. "I do have a gift for you, brother," I whispered to my reflection, holding the envelope containing all the evidence of his crimes. "Just not the one you expected." The morning of Thomas' return dawned clear and crisp, a perfect October day in New York. I arrived at our family mansion in Bedford at 7 a.m. hours before Thomas and Natalie were scheduled to return from their Maldives vacation. Mrs. Rodriguez opened the service entrance, tears streaming down her face as she embraced me. "Oh, Miss Haley," she whispered, "it is a miracle. We have missed you so terribly." "I have missed you too," I replied, touched by her genuine emotion. "But we must focus now. Everything must be exactly as they expect it when they arrive." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded firmly, transforming from emotional to efficient in an instant. She had served our family through countless business crises and social events. This was simply another situation requiring her professional excellence. The FBI agents arrived next, led by Special Agent Diana Foster, who had been investigating financial crimes in the tech industry for 15 years. She and her team established discreet positions throughout the property, hidden from immediate view, but ready to move in at the signal. Technical specialists set up recording equipment to document every word of the confrontation. By noon, Robert Walsh had arrived with 3 keyboard members: Jonathan Pierce, Sophia Williams, and Marcus Thompson. All 3 had been longtime allies of our parents who had reluctantly accepted Thomas' leadership after my apparent death. Their shock at seeing me alive was profound. Sophia, a distinguished woman in her 60s who had been on the board since Meridian's early days, gripped my hands tightly. "When Robert told us you were alive, I didn't dare believe it," she said, her voice breaking. Thomas' explanation of the accident always seemed too convenient, but none of us could prove anything. "The hardest part was watching him dismantle everything your parents built." Marcus added, the normally stoic financial expert, showing rare emotion. "Every value, every principle, sacrificed for short-term profit." "I appreciate your honesty," I told them, "and I understand the impossible position you were in. Today isn't about blame for the past, but about correcting the course for the future." With our witnesses and law enforcement in place, we moved to final preparations. The confrontation needed to occur in the main foyer where multiple hidden cameras could capture every angle. The household staff would appear normal until given the signal to withdraw, leaving Thomas and Natalie no allies in the crucial first moments of shock. At precisely 3:45 p.m., the security system alerted us to a car approaching the main gate. Thomas and Natalie were returning right on schedule. Everyone moved to their positions. The board members and Robert withdrew to the library out of immediate sight, but able to emerge at the crucial moment. FBI agents concealed themselves in adjacent rooms. I took my position directly at the base of the grand staircase, the most dramatic and unavoidable spot in the foyer. In my hand, I held a large envelope containing copies of all the evidence: the captain's testimony, the financial records of offshore accounts, the emails discussing how to remove me from the company, and photos from the yacht documenting the, quote, clear weather conditions that contradicted Thomas' story. The originals were safely preserved with multiple attorneys and law enforcement agencies, ensuring that whatever happened in the next few minutes, Thomas could not escape justice. The sound of tires on gravel announced their arrival. Through the beveled glass of the front doors, I could see the silhouettes of my brother and his girlfriend. Their postures relaxed and entitled as they laughed about something, while collecting their luggage from the trunk of the town car. Thomas' voice carried through the door as he loudly complained about flight delays and incompetent staff at the Maldives resort. Then the front door swung open, and time seemed to slow. Thomas entered first, his designer sunglasses still on, despite being indoors, his tan prominent against his white linen shirt. Natalie followed, scrolling through her phone, half a sentence about dinner reservations dying on her lips as she looked up and saw me. The shock on their faces was everything I had imagined during my months of planning. Thomas' sunglasses slipped from his face in slow motion, clattering on the marble floor. Natalie dropped her phone with a crack that echoed through the sudden silence. "Welcome home, brother," I said calmly. "I believe this belongs to you." I held out the envelope. Thomas stared at it, then at me, his mind visibly struggling to process what his eyes were seeing. This isn't possible," he stammered, his face draining of all color. "You drowned." The Coast Guard confirmed. "The search. They said no one could survive." "And yet here I am," I replied, taking one step toward him. "Apparently your plan wasn't as foolproof as you thought." Natalie recovered first, her shock transforming into calculation. She grabbed Thomas' arm, tugging him backward toward the door. "Thomas, don't say anything. This has to be some kind of trick. A look-alike or something." Thomas shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. "No, it's her. It's Haley. But how?" "Not important," I cut him off. "What matters is what happens next. In this envelope is everything the authorities need to know about what really happened on that yacht. About the offshore accounts. About your plans for Meridian that would destroy our parents' legacy." His expression shifted, then fear giving way to the cold anger I remembered from the yacht. "You have nothing," he snarled, taking a step toward me. "No one will believe you over me. I'm the one who has been here running the company while you've been. What, hiding, planning this dramatic little scene?" "Actually, she has quite a lot," came Miranda's voice as she emerged from the adjacent room, "including Captain Diaz's sworn statement about the real conditions the day you pushed your sister overboard." Thomas' head whipped toward her betrayal, flashing across his features at the sight of Miranda, whom he had always considered an ally due to her friendship with me rather than a threat in her own right. "The captain is an alcoholic," he dismissed, but I could hear the first note of uncertainty in his voice. His testimony would never hold up. "Perhaps not alone," Miranda agreed pleasantly. "But combined with the financial records showing how you paid him, and the 7 other staff members who have provided statements about your instructions that morning, it's quite compelling." Natalie tugged more urgently at Thomas' arm. "We need to leave. Now. Call security." Thomas reached for his phone, but I shook my head. "The security team you hired has been temporarily relieved by federal agents," I explained, "and the household staff is cooperating fully with the investigation." As if on cue, Agent Foster stepped into view, her FBI credentials visible. "Thomas Bennett, we have some questions regarding the disappearance of Haley Bennett, as well as numerous financial irregularities at Meridian Technologies." "This is ridiculous." Thomas exploded, his composed facade cracking completely. "She fell. It was an accident during a storm." "The weather reports and ship's logs say otherwise," Agent Foster replied evenly. Thomas' face contorted with rage as he realized how completely he'd been outmaneuvered. His gaze locked on me, and in that moment I saw the same murderous intent I'd witnessed on the yacht. "You," he hissed suddenly, lunging toward me. "This is all your fault. It was supposed to be mine." He moved with surprising speed, hands outstretched toward my throat, but 3 months on a Greek island had made me stronger than the sister he remembered. I sidestepped his charge, using his momentum to send him stumbling past me. FBI agents rushed forward, restraining him as he continued to shout accusations and threats that only further incriminated him. Natalie tried to flee during the commotion but was intercepted at the door by another agent. As Thomas was handcuffed, still raging about his rightful claim to the company, the board members emerged from the library having witnessed everything. Sophia stepped forward, her expression stern, as she addressed my brother. "The board has seen and heard enough, Thomas. Consider yourself removed from all positions at Meridian Technologies effective immediately." "You can't do that," Thomas shouted, as agents began leading him toward the door. "I'm the CEO. I'm the controlling shareholder." "Actually," Jonathan Pierce interjected, "according to your parents, will those rights revert entirely to Haley in the event of criminal activity on your part? The board has already drafted the necessary paperwork based on the evidence Miss Chen provided." As Thomas was escorted from the mansion, still protesting his innocence despite his damning outburst, I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sadness. This was my brother, my only living family, being taken away in handcuffs for trying to murder me. Despite everything, some small part of me mourned the relationship we could have had, the partnership our parents had envisioned when they structured their will to require our cooperation. Natalie, separated from Thomas and facing her own charges as an accessory, finally dropped her loyal girlfriend act. It was all his idea, she insisted to the agents leading her out. "I just went along with it because I was afraid of what he might do. I can tell you everything." When the mansion finally emptied of law enforcement and board members with promises of lengthy meetings to follow in the coming days, I stood alone in the foyer where the confrontation had unfolded. "Mrs. Rodriguez approached quietly, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Your parents would be proud of how you handled this, Miss Haley," she said. "Not with vengeance, but with justice." I turned to her with tears in my eyes. "I never wanted any of this. I would have happily shared everything with him." She nodded wisely. "I know, and deep down I think he knew that too. But some people cannot see past what they believe. They deserve to appreciate what they already have." As I climbed the stairs to my old bedroom, untouched since before the fateful yacht trip, I felt the weight of all that had happened and all that was still to come. Thomas' trial, rebuilding the company, healing from betrayal by my only living family member. But for the first time since feeling the cold Mediterranean water close over my head, I also felt something else. The certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be, protecting the legacy my parents had entrusted to me, no matter how painful the path had been. The legal proceedings against Thomas unfolded over the next 18 months. Despite hiring the most expensive defense attorneys in New York, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Captain Diaz testified about the clear weather conditions and Thomas' instructions to keep the crew below deck. Financial experts detailed the offshore accounts where company funds had been diverted. Most damaging was the security footage from our confrontation at the mansion, where Thomas had effectively confessed in his rage. The trial made international headlines. Tech hire tried to murder sister for $7 billion fortune. Reporters camped outside the courthouse daily, hoping for a glimpse of the siblings whose family tragedy had become the ultimate cautionary tale about greed and betrayal. I attended each day of the proceedings, sitting quietly in the courtroom as the prosecution methodically laid out the case. Thomas never looked at me directly, staring straight ahead with the same cold calculation I'd seen on the yacht. When the jury delivered the guilty verdict on all counts, attempted murder, fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy, he showed no emotion. At the sentencing hearing, the judge addressed him directly. "Mr. Bennett, you were born into extraordinary privilege and opportunity, yet you chose to attempt to murder your own sister rather than share the wealth most people can only dream of. The court sentences you to 25 years in prison without possibility of parole." Only then did Thomas finally meet my gaze. His eyes filled not with remorse but with a hatred so pure it sent chills down my spine. Even facing decades behind bars, he believed himself the victim. Natalie, who had agreed to testify against Thomas in exchange for leniency, received 5 years for her role as an accessory. Her tearful testimony about being manipulated by Thomas might have swayed some jurors, but text messages recovered from her phone revealed her enthusiastic participation in planning what they had called the unfortunate accident. With the trial behind me, I focused on rebuilding Meridian Technologies according to our parents' original vision. The board unanimously appointed me as CEO, with Robert Walsh returning as COO. Our first action was to halt the sale of the medical research division that Thomas had initiated. Instead, we doubled its funding, accelerating development of breakthrough treatments for previously untreatable conditions. Within a year, our teams announced a revolutionary gene therapy for a rare childhood disease that had previously been a death sentence. We priced it at cost plus minimal margin, ensuring accessibility to all patients regardless of economic status. I rehired the dedicated employees Thomas had terminated, creating a return bonus structure that compensated them for their lost time. Many wept during the reorientation, expressing how they had felt orphaned when my parents died, and then betrayed when Thomas dismantled the company culture they had built. The Thomas Bennett Memorial Foundation was immediately dissolved, replaced by the Bennett Family Innovation Fund that provided grants to young entrepreneurs focused on technology for social good. The irony of the name change was not lost on the business press, who noted that while Thomas remained very much alive in federal prison, his approach to business had been definitively laid to rest. 6 months after the trial concluded, I organized a special trip back to the small Greek village that had sheltered me. Andreas and Maria were surprised when a private jet landed at the nearest airport, and a car delivered formal invitations to visit New York as my honored guests. Despite Andreas' initial reluctance to leave his fishing boat, Maria eventually convinced him that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Their 2-week stay at the mansion became one of the most healing experiences of my recovery. Watching Andreas' face as he toured Meridian Technologies, struggling to comprehend the scale of what his rescue had preserved, brought tears to my eyes. Maria, now considering graduate programs in marine biology, spent hours in our research facilities, her natural intelligence finding immediate rapport with our scientists. Before they returned to Greece, I established a trust fund for their village, providing for infrastructure improvements and educational scholarships that would transform life for the entire community. Andreas protested that no payment was necessary for simply doing what any decent person would do, but I insisted this wasn't payment but partnership. An investment in the kind of values that had saved my life, when technology and wealth could act not. The hardest part of my journey was not the physical recovery or even the legal battles, but the emotional process of accepting my brother's betrayal. I engaged a trauma therapist who specialized in family betrayal, working through the complicated grief of losing my only sibling, not to death, but to his own worst instincts. There were nights I woke gasping for breath, feeling the cold Mediterranean waters closing over my head. Days when a passing yacht on the Hudson triggered panic attacks so severe I had to be driven home from work. Moments when a man with Thomas' build or mannerisms on a busy street would send me spiraling back to that morning on the deck. My therapist helped me understand that trauma recovery isn't linear, that forgiving myself for not seeing the signs earlier was as important as processing my anger toward Thomas, that the survivor's guilt I felt questioning why our parents had trusted me more, whether I'd somehow contributed to Thomas' resentment, was normal but not rational. Slowly, I rebuilt my sense of safety and purpose. I filled the mansion with new memories, hosting monthly dinners for employees and their families, transforming it from a monument to wealth into a living community. I dated occasionally, though I approached new relationships with understandable caution, always transparent about my trust issues and the public baggage of my family history. 2 years after the confrontation at the mansion, I received a letter from Thomas, forwarded by his prison counselor. I stared at the envelope for days before finding the courage to open it. Inside was not the apology or explanation I might have hoped for, but 8 pages of detailed blame, justifying his actions and accusing me of stealing his birthright. After reading it twice, I placed it in a file marked Thomas rather than throwing it away. His hatred was part of my story, and denying its existence would not help me heal from its impact. But I refused to allow it to dictate my future or corrupt the legacy I was rebuilding. That same week, I launched the Bennett Second Chance Initiative, a program that hired and trained formerly incarcerated individuals for careers in technology. When reporters asked if this was inspired by my brother, I simply replied that everyone deserves an opportunity to redefine themselves after failure, whether or not they choose to take it. 3 years after being pushed from that yacht, I stood at the podium of a global technology conference, accepting an award for Meridian's revolutionary approach to accessible medical innovation. Looking out at the audience, I saw not just industry peers, but the extended family I'd created. Miranda in the front row, Mrs. Rodriguez beaming proudly, Robert giving me a thumbs up, and via livestream, Andreas and Maria watching from their village in Greece. The journey from the cold Mediterranean waters to this moment had been longer and more painful than any route plotted on a map. My brother had tried to kill me for money that had never been the source of our parents' true wealth. Their real legacy was in the values they lived, by the innovations they created to help others, and the love they tried to instill in both their children. I had nearly died protecting that legacy, but in surviving, I found something more valuable than the billions at stake. I discovered my own strength, built authentic relationships based on mutual respect, rather than obligation, and created meaning from the darkest experience of my life. As I conclude my story, I want to ask you this question. If everything was suddenly taken from you, what would you fight hardest to reclaim? Would it be material possessions or something deeper? Your answer reveals what truly matters in your life. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to hear more survival stories, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that sometimes our worst moments can lead to our greatest strength. Thank you for listening to my journey from betrayal to rebuilding. Remember, true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in how we rise after falling.